Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking at Israel's uncertain election, and it is a nail-biter. Less than 90 minutes to go before the polls close. With us, Likud supporter Glenn Feder. Welcome back. Welcome back to Dalia Scheinlin, campaigner for the opposition Zionist Union, who joins us from Tel Aviv. Also in Tel Aviv, political consultant Stephen Miller. And with us in the studio, Yael Ler, who supports the Arab Joint List, which brings together, and we'll talk about it now, people of various stripes. There's communists, nationalists, and Islamists all together. Some say it's a bit of a motley crew, an unlikely coalition.
It's unlikely, but it was very normal and very natural. The only question is why it's the first time it happens. Because actually, when one examines, one check how these parties function before in the parliament, they always vote together. They represent the same people. When you have state oppression against the Palestinian citizens of Israel, it's only normal to protest as Palestinian citizens of Israel. Of course, it's called the joint list, not joint Arab list. There are not that many Jewish citizens like myself in it, but there are. I mean, a few thousands. And there is one deputy, one of the members of the Knesset of the Hadash party, the Communist Party, is an Israeli Jew. And the fact was that actually this party might happen also in the previous election. We were almost there. We were campaigning, many people...
But as Glenn Feder was saying, that electoral reform
the election reform force, there was no question about it. Yeah, because there was no choice. But in any case, it could happen because actually many Palestinian citizens, they could not anymore understand the differences between the different parties, because there are differences, but the difference should be visible in different places, not in the Knesset. Because in the Knesset, when one confronts the racism of Netanyahu or racist declaration as a declaration of Netanyahu this afternoon, you just stand there together. Any democratic person should stand there together, right. Not only the Arab citizens, but all the Arab citizens are there together.
Netanyahu, who warned his supporters to go to the polls, warning of a strong Israeli-Arab vote. In part one of our discussion, Stephen Miller saying that right now, for the time being, the evidence still circumstantial as to just how strong the turnout will be among an Arab population that in past votes turned out in very low numbers. For the first time, though, some telling France 24 they will be casting their ballots.
By participating in the elections and by having people who represent us at the Knesset, we can further the rights of Arabs.
Before anything else, we want our economical situation to improve. We want work. All the youths you see here are unemployed. And of course, we want an end to the occupation.
Dalia Scheinlin, do you see a scenario whereby there could be eventually, if the horse trading drags on, a grand coalition, and this block of the Arab Joint List becomes the official opposition in the Knesset?
Mm-hmm. Well, the goal of the Zionist Union has never been to form a unity government. There has been very strong feeling among a great many Israelis that the primary task here is to replace Netanyahu, who's been prime minister for a grand total of 9 years. So, the leadership of the Zionist Union, first of all, undertook a dramatic move to join two of these parties together in order to create this kind of party coalition to help overthrow Netanyahu. We're not in this in order to form a coalition government. But I do think it's very significant. I want to get back to this idea of how the Arab parties unified. For one thing, what Netanyahu's response today really highlights how he's panicking and how he is willing to sacrifice the good of the country for his political agenda. And in democracy, you should never be sorry that citizens are voting. It should never be a factor used to create fear that citizens are voting. And what's interesting about it is that the whole threshold issue began with Avigdor Lieberman, his party pushing, raising the electoral threshold. But in the end, his party is the one that is, sort of working around, dancing around this newly raised threshold, while the Arab parties stand to benefit from it because they have decided to unify, and they will very likely come in, possibly even the third biggest party. So while I can't say that they will be the leader of the opposition, because I don't expect the creation of a coalition government, of a grand coalition government, they will certainly bring a newfound force to Israeli politics. And the other thing it highlights is, that Netanyahu himself, it goes back to what we said before. He began his campaign by saying that Israeli politics is paralyzed because the governing system is too fragmented and the coalitions can't be strong enough, so we must work on electoral reform. But then every single week he essentially jumped into a different topic, bringing up new issues, from attacks on the Israeli press to attacks on the left to the fear of Iran, and it just couldn't stay on any sort of message. And we're seeing that right up until these final hours, where he then accuses the country's citizens of undertaking their democratic privilege of voting.
All right, we talked to
so I think it, hopefully I think it highlights to Israelis why he's, running all over the place and can't stay on any message, because he does seem to be concerned about losing power. And
what is certainly clear throughout this campaign is that the message of the opposition Zionist Union has been to agree to make it a referendum on Netanyahu to a certain extent. Let's listen to what the leader of the Zionist Union had to say.
The public is genuinely frustrated. The public wants a change, the public asks for a change, and the public aspires for hope and is revolted by and fed up with the status quo. I am the only one who can change the country's situation. I am the only one who can get a mandate from the president to form a government. To get a mandate from the president, I need to lead a clear majority over Likud and Netanyahu.
Let's cross now to Tel Aviv and the headquarters of the Zionist Union, and France 24's correspondent Gallagher Fenwick. Gallagher, we've talked a lot about Benjamin Netanyahu so far. Isaac Herzog, how has he done on the campaign trail?
Well, Francois, he has really focused his campaign on social economic issues, notably the housing crisis, which is such an important theme for very many Israelis. Just a few days ago, a couple weeks ago actually, Israel's state controller, basically an independent political figure, issued a scathing report on the state of the housing market in Israel, saying that prices between 2008 and 2013 had risen by 55%. If you look, for instance, at what housing is in Tel Aviv, where I'm standing, prices are somewhat similar to what you find in Paris, where you are. But salaries, the average salary of Israelis is far lower than what their equivalent is in Paris. And this has really struck a strong note with very many Israeli voters. In a recent survey, pollsters went around asking Israelis what the main issue for them would be when they would go to the polls and vote. And 60% of them said social economic issues, the cost of life, the housing crisis, social welfare. And these are all themes that Isaac Herzog and his co-lister Tzipi Livni really focused on, hammering away the message that they will deal with these issues that are so important to Israelis, whereas their main rival, the current Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, was very much focusing on security, the security of the state of Israel, standing up to the international community, not buckling under international pressure on security, the division of Jerusalem, and so on. But if you look at that same survey I was just mentioning seconds ago, it shows that only 19% of Israeli respondents thought that security would be the most important issue for them when they would drop their ballots in the ballot boxes this Tuesday when they went to vote. So again, the center-left making a bet that social economic issues were the theme to go with in this election. And so far, if we rely on the last polls that were published last Friday that give them a 4-seat lead over Likud, it's been a pretty effective bet, and it has worked to a certain extent. Whether or not they have been able to maintain this lead, of course, remains to be seen. But let's also look at Netanyahu over the past couple days, 3 days. He also realized that he also had to speak about these very important themes. And for instance, a couple days ago, he said that if he were to remain Israel's prime minister, one of the first things he would do would be to seriously tackle the housing crisis. And he acknowledged that his government has not done enough to deal with this, again, very important theme for Israelis. Remember, back in 2011, hundreds of thousands of Israelis took to the streets, not only of Tel Aviv, but all over the country, demanding social justice and above all, that the housing crisis be solved. Now, when France 24 went around asking, for instance, analysts or professors, such as the director of the Affordable Housing Center at the Tel Aviv University, she was saying that basically what has happened is that the state has completely let the free market take over, and that does not work, according to this professor, with the housing market. The state needs to get more involved, regulate, subsidize, and offer land for cheap and not in the territories. And that's what Netanyahu was referring to a little bit earlier in East Jerusalem when he said, sure, I'll deal with housing and I'm going to build more housing for the settlers, the settler community. He was saying that from the settlement of Ha-Homa in East Jerusalem. That certainly will help, probably help him shore up support with his hard right-wing supporters. Not sure, however, that it will help him bridge that gap that is such a concern to him, that gap with his, of course, main rival on the center left.
All right, Gallagher Fenwick, and of course we'll be checking in with you when those polls close in what, a little over an hour and a quarter in Tel Aviv. Gallagher Fenwick joining us from outside of the headquarters there of the opposition Zionist Union. Lots of reactions coming in on Twitter. Ali Hadi saying Netanyahu urges racist far right to vote to counterbalance the increasing Arab vote. Desperation is in the air. So there's one person who's not a fan of Bibi. But again, Stephen Miller, I'm haunted by what you said at the beginning of, or I don't know if haunted's the right word, of what you said in part one of our discussion, that in the end, Netanyahu's strategy could well pay off, even if it's been something of a lackluster campaign.
Yeah, well, we've heard from our distinguished guests a little bit of a spin here. Certainly that the Prime Minister has chosen the Israeli Arab population as a scare tactic should not be a surprise to any campaign strategist. He's going to be using the fear strategy. He's just scared people based off of the news and left-wing organizations and outside foreign money. So he threw the Arabs into the mix today. I don't agree with it. But if you're Prime Minister Netanyahu and your premiership's on the line, you're going to do whatever message, again, within that small pool of right-wing voters who are debating between Likud and potentially the Jewish Home, Yisrael Beitenu, Kachlon, the Kulanu Party, whatever those right-wing parties are, you're going to use whatever message specifically to bring those voters home, and you're going to forget about the rest of the political map and certainly, the pontificators around the world on the foreign media. And to the other distinguished guests who spoke about the Arab list, this is a unity of three very different parties with different levels of religiosity, different ideologies, and they together for one reason, and that's to pass the threshold and get into the government. I would not be surprised if they break back up after this election. And it might take 2 months, it might take 2 years, but this is not a marriage by choice, this is a marriage by force.
All right, message by force. Stephen, when you look ahead now to again the horse trading that's going to begin when the polls close, would you say that after this electoral reform, after all that's happened, that Israel is a more fractious place, or are we going to see through the smoke?
I wouldn't connect the fractures to the threshold. First of all, certainly there might be a surprise where one of the smaller parties on the left or the right doesn't pass that threshold, and it would shrink in the number of parties that will sit in the next Knesset, in the next parliament. Having said that, the cause of the fracture is the division of the center. It's that you have several parties sitting on the center, when historically, whether it was Kadima most recently, you had one party in the center, and so the fracture is less connected to the threshold, I believe.
And will those parties be more amenable to joining with Isaac Herzog or with Benjamin Netanyahu?
That's a great question. That's a million-dollar question. I think many of these party leaders in the center, certainly if you're talking about Lapid, Kachlon, who was a former Likudnik who created his own party, Avigdor Lieberman from Israel-Beitenu, I think there's a lot of personal animosity, disagreement. These guys don't like Benjamin Netanyahu. Having said that, this is a full-on negotiation. You put the farm on the table and you go after every animal, you go after every piece of straw, you go after the window and the door. Everything is up for negotiation, positions, committee chairmanships, ministries, budgets, and you go for the best deal you can. This election is more about who is running to be a kingmaker than who is running to be prime minister.
All right. Reactions coming in. One in support of the incumbent prime minister. Scott on Twitter saying Netanyahu is the biggest threat to ISIS and a nuclear Iran. So there's an endorsement there. And of course, that harks back when we see that tweet to that March the 3rd speech that happened not in front of the Knesset, but in front of the U.S. Congress. And there's a question I've got to put to both Glenn Feder and Dalia Scheindlin, which is, it's been a weird campaign in that sense. Do you get the sense it's sort of a blurring of U.S. and Israeli politics?
Well, I think it's true that this all came on the heels of a very controversial speech in the United States and historically low relations between.
You had the Republicans involved with against Obama and Netanyahu involved in it as well. It seemed as though you couldn't tell whether we were talking about Israeli or U.S. politics.
This is an historic low point for, I think they've tried to downplay it, but between the current administration and the United States, and it would take a while to explain who's at fault, really. I think they're coming from totally different worldviews. I think Netanyahu is being much more realistic about Iran and the security threats to Israel than Obama is, but you're right, there has been a lot of partisan politics that have, in a strange way, like you said, in a weird way, gone abroad, and also Netanyahu is pointing to other sources of influence abroad. He mentioned, for example, NGOs that are actually busing in people, Arab Israelis, to vote for the current joint Arab Party. And so this is, I agree, an election where there's a lot of international components, more than usual.
Dalia Scheindlin?
Well, I mean, I think I will agree with my colleague on one point only, and that is that U.S.-Israel relations have reached a low point. But I think that this is entirely clear that it's not about, one president. It is because the relationship has been politicized. It is unprecedented that Democrats and Republicans have ever had to break over Israel. It's always been a bipartisan issue. We've never had a situation through decades of a very strong relationship where it has been anything but a bipartisan issue, and it is on Netanyahu's watch over the last 5 years that this relationship has been deteriorating. I think the speech, again, showed what I said before, that he was willing to put his own political benefit over what's good for the country and for that relationship. I don't agree that there's any blurring of the lines between Israel and America. But what I can say is that Israelis, almost a consensus of Israelis, and I have put this to survey research, are aware that Israel is very dependent on America. And they know the value of that relationship. And they want it to be a partnership. And Israel should be fighting its enemies, not its allies. And I think many people are extremely concerned. Actually, I have not really been involved in an election at any point up until now where the relationship between Israel and the U.S., and in general Israel's foreign relations, has been such a prominent concern on people's minds. So when we ask people, how do you think the country's doing? People say, I'm concerned because we're not getting along with our allies, and I'm very concerned about the Israel-U.S. relationship. Well, you can play that any way you want, but when it goes way beyond, the president, and it has to do with the administration, and it has to do with Congress, and the bipartisan consensus that used to exist on Israel, which is now being fractured, that relationship is in trouble. And that's something Netanyahu has to answer for, and that the Zionist Union is proposing among its top priorities to repair.
Stephen Miller, on that point, a lot's been made about the U.S. money that's been involved in this campaign. The casino magnate Sheldon Adelson financing both the Republican Party and Likud. The accusation by Netanyahu that there were these foreign forces or money from abroad that's coming in. How much of U.S. money has been involved in this campaign?
Certainly, there's been a lot of attention on all sides of the map. So, you know, the media attention to me, I think, is misplaced on this issue because it's not overtly on one party. In fact, there's many nonprofits in the state of Israel that rely on foreign funding. The EU is investing funds left, right, and center. Obviously, U.S. administration, private citizens. There's lots of interest around election time, not around election time. I don't think it's specifically towards one part of the spectrum, so I don't hold much weight in this. Although there are some reports coming out that some of the foreign-funded groups have made an impact on the center and center-left turnout. We'll see soon enough.
All right, we'll see in, what is it, a little over an hour from now. Yael Lera, final point on all this, what kind of a coalition do you see coming out of these elections?
That I do agree with everybody here that it's very, very difficult to predict anything because there are too many factors, too many things that can happen because of this threshold change. I do think, though, I do believe that the most probably that we'll have a coalition government of both Likud and the Zionist camp at the end of the day. I think it's the most easy thing to do. In any case, the joint list cannot be part of the government. It can support the government not unconditionally from outside because the joint list is against the Jewish character of the state, is against the occupation, and actually there is this consensus all around that doesn't challenge these things.
Right,
also, there is one very important thing that was
very briefly because we're out of time.
Yeah, saying it, that actually, if we look today on all the political map in Israel, it's all people that came from the Likud party. So we speak about left and center and right, but actually it's right and right and right and a little bit some leftovers of some left that is joined in one camp with some right wing. And it means a lot about what's going on in Israel. I do hope for a change. I think that the joint list by itself is an important change, but I'm not that optimistic.
Yael Lera, I want to thank you. I want to thank Glenn Feder as well. I want to thank for joining us from Tel Aviv, both Dalia Scheindlin and Stephen Miller. Stay with us, though, because our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois. I've been given the delightful task of summing up this election in 3 minutes in terms of the online...
Can you predict a winner as well?
Well, I'm not going to do that. But the social media and indeed online analysis elements of this have been huge, multifaceted, etc. So just to try to give you a sense of it, online on social media, people taking sides with hashtags, etc. I stand with Israel being a hashtag that a lot of Israelis or Israeli Americans or English speakers have been using to support actually mostly Benjamin Netanyahu in this case. Also, I stand with Bibi, that hashtag being used here with, in this case, a photo of Benjamin Netanyahu when he was in the army. Also, videos from the likes of Chuck Norris endorsing Benjamin Netanyahu. Not everyone's seeing that as a positive thing for his campaign, but they're out there. Meanwhile, Bibi doesn't speak for me. Now, that one has been trending mostly on American social media with those who have distinct differences with Benjamin Netanyahu's policies. It's sharing a video here of his declaration in the last 24 hours or so. Right-wing government in danger. Arabs are voting in droves. And that was a statement that was picked up on social media with screen grabs, for example, from the Haaretz website. The right wing is in danger. Arabs are voting in droves. The New York Times also reacting to that with this headline: Netanyahu says no to statehood for Palestinians. And indeed, in The Atlantic, writing in The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg was very critical of that, saying that this is essentially in a fight for his political life. He has attempted to shore up his right-wing base by renouncing the commitment he made to a two-state solution back in 2009. the so-called Bar Ilan speech made at Bar Ilan University. That generated memes online as well, such as this one, "Brace yourself, the Arabs are voting." So there's a lot on that, Francois, a lot of buzz on that. This is an article on the I24 website showing that, that the perception within Israel is that the world's media seems to be keen for Netanyahu to go, in fact, and that, I suppose, could be, this is one example. It's indeed the example that the I24 article used this morning's front cover from the Libération News website. Bye Bibi. Well, there is a question mark there. It's not definitive.
And we'll, of course, start to figure out, because first you got to count the ballots, then you got to form a coalition.
Right.
A lot more to come.
Certainly.
We'll know a little more in a little over an hour's time.
In the next
James Creedon, I want to thank you. I want to thank our panel.
Thank
you for being with us. And again, stay with us. Laura Cellier will be with you for all of the coverage as the polls close in Israel.